learning in Beraishis Yom Sheni. Vayomer Elokim Yerakir b'sar chamayim v'maldo b'mayim l'moyim. Vayasel Elokim b'sar rakir vayatel ben amayim hashmitach l'rakir ben amayim hashem yal rakir vayichein. Vayikra Elokim l'rakir shamayim vayerev vayigim sheni. God separated the water. It was a big glob of water. He created the water above, created the water below. And we talked about Footner's analysis of where the source material for Bechira comes from is in day 2. Quote unquote, the world now became a below and an above. With that concept in the world of a below and an above, there now on the 6th day can be a man created from the dust below, because now there's a below, and a neshama from above. There's a concept of above. And on the 6th day, put together an Adam, which created Bechira. Neshama wants this, Guf wants this, created the Bechira. So, but the source material for Adam's Bechira is on day 2. We also mentioned that the water below cried to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and said, Ana be'inal meheva kama malka. We read the Pachad Yitzchak about that. The water below said, what just happened to me? We were all one glob of water in front of the Kisei HaKavod, and now suddenly we got split. Some water is above, and I'm stuck here down on earth. What happened to me? I want to go back up to be with the rest of the water above. HaKadosh Baruch Hu consoled the water below by saying that every korban that comes on the Mizbeach is going, every mincha, every korban is going to have salt put on it. Salt is a byproduct of water, and therefore water below. Don't be so disappointed that you ended up below, because while you ended up below, you're going to have a very great significance in the Beis HaMikdash. Salt, which is a byproduct of you water, is going to go on every korban that goes to the Mizbeach. So you can end up coming above in a great way through the Mizbeach. The Rebbeinu Shalom also said, Sukkos. On Sukkos, there's going to be Nisa Chamayim. Besides the wine that's poured with the korban, there will be water poured with the korban. How many days on Sukkos and Machlokas in the Gemara? But on Sukkos, there's Nisa Chamayim. And that was the whole Simchas Beis HaSho'eva. Simchas Beis HaSho'eva is the Simcha of the drawing of the water. People would gather in the courtyard, the Ezras Noshim of the Beis HaMikdash, and there would be dancing and singing, and there would be 15 steps. We know in the Ezras Noshim, we learned Masechta Midas, there were 15 steps in the Ezras Noshim that led to Sha'ar Nikanor, and on those 15 steps, the Leviim stood, and they had instruments, and they sang the 15 Shir Hamalos. And this was to create the Simcha, U'she'aftem mayim b'sasai mimayne hayeshua. They would dance and sing the entire night to bring themselves into a festive mood, so that early morning they would go out, draw the water, bring it back to the Beis HaMikdash, and at the appropriate time pour it on the Mizbeach. And so the water below was consoled. You, while you remain below on earth, you will end up on the Mizbeach, and through the Mizbeach, you're going to become part of a service to the Rabbeinu Shalom, either through the salt or the Nisa Chamayim on Sukkos, which is brought about through this great Simchas Beis HaSho'eva. To complete our discussion about the sugya of Bechira, it's one of the big sugyas we talk about so often. We talked about it yesterday as well. We talked about Amalek, Yimach Shemam B'Zichram, and their attack on Bechira. We speak about Bechira so much in the Das Terunos, Guf Neshama, or Ha'oras Ponim, Hastaras Ponim, Bechira Kadosh Baruch Hu is the system is created for the Bechira, so that man will have free choices, and through making the right choices, the Rebbeinu Shalom will be able to give schar, and the tachlis of the Bria is hatova. Rebbeinu Shalom wants to give schar. That's his will. So there's another piece of Pachad Yitzchak that we're going to learn today about Bechira. And again, this has to do with water, and it has to do with day 2 and day 3. So I'm going to read a few psukim from day 3, and then we'll go to the Pachad Yitzchak with Shmuel. Thank you, Shmuel, for taking care of this. Day 3, you have a Pachad Yitzchak that was sent to you by Shmuel. Day 3. Vayomer Elokim. Now remember, on day 2, it doesn't say Ki Tov. The only day it doesn't say Ki Tov, God saw that it was good. It doesn't say it on day 2. On day 3, it says Ki Tov twice. And Rashi explains, because on day 2, God began working on the water. He split the water between the water above and the water below. But now the water below was still one huge glob of water below. There was no place, you couldn't see any land. So the Rebbeinu Shalom did not finish working with the water on day 2, and therefore it doesn't say Ki Tov. Because when you start something and you don't finish it, you don't say Ki Tov yet, you say Ki Tov when you finish the work. And we talked about what the Rebbeinu Shalom is saying to us as he's creating the world. We also become partners in creation. As a shutav l'Hakadosh Baruch Hu b'ma'aseh Beraishis, the Gemara says there are ways that a person can become a partner with the Rebbeinu Shalom to perfect that imperfectly, to perfect that perfectly imperfect world that God created for us to finish off. And through finishing that off, we get that schar. But the Rebbeinu Shalom is talking to us when on a day like, and we talked about this at great length, every day basically something went wrong. Every day God had to separate something from something. And chas v'shalom, this is not because God said, whoops, I made a mistake, let's separate the darkness from the light. Oops, I made a mistake. The big light, the sun, the small light, the moon, they were originally both big, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu made one small. These are not like God rethinking himself. This is God talking to us that the same way in his 6 days of creation and active creation, in his creative work, things happen during the week. He's telling us that as you go through your 6 days of active creativity, things will happen. Take it easy. So there's a day where you can't get everything done about your hair, because in the activity of the Rebbeinu Shalom, not because he couldn't finish the work of the water on day 2, well, he didn't have enough time, chas v'shalom. He could have finished on day 2. His mamish talking to us. It's okay. You're human. If you don't finish everything on day 2 or day 3, pick up on the next day and continue. Just get it done. You don't give up hope and say, well, I didn't get it done, I'm just going to forget about it. If it's something important, pick up the pieces and finish the job, even if it's the next day. So on day 3, Vayomer Elokim yikavu hamayim mitachas hashamayim amokim echad v'seiroeh hayabasha vayichei. God said, let the waters collect, the water below, underneath heaven, let it collect in one place. In other words, let's have an ocean. And now that the water is collected in one place, we'll be able to see the earth. The earth will be exposed. Vayikra Elokim le'abosha eretz, and God called the dry area eretz, u'lemikveh hamayim kore yamim, and to the gathering of the water, he called it yamim, oceans. Vayar Elokim ki tov, and God saw that it was good. So that's the first ki tov of the 3rd day. The second ki tov of the 3rd day will be about the grass and the plants and the trees. So we're going to stop there in the Chumash. Day 2, God separates the water above from the water below and has a firmament between the water above and the water below. No ki tov. On day 3, God says, now all the water below gather into one place. let the earth be exposed. Earth will be called Eretz, water will be called Yamim, Vayarlekim Kitov. Now the water project is completed. We understand that when the Ribono Shel Olam created this thing called oceans and said, I want the water to gather in one place and I want the earth to be exposed, God was creating two places. He created the land, which is going to be fit for human habitation. Man is going to live on the dry land on earth. Man doesn't live underwater. So the Ribono Shel Olam, when he separated the water above from the water below on day 2, and on day 3, he now collects the water in one place and instructs the earth to be exposed. He now has created a place where a man can live, and he also has created an ocean where man cannot live. You can take a swim in it, you can take a dive in it, you can maybe go on a submarine, but it's not a place of human habitation. What does that mean for us? That God created a place where man cannot live. He can't function there. So in the Pachad Yitzhak, on the right side of the page, paragraph Yudalet, Ma'ato novo lovares hamyuchad b'simcha zudasokas. Ksiv. The Pasuk says in Tehillim, and we say this, L'David Mizmor, Hashem ha'oretzim lo ha'tevel v'yosh ve'va. Interestingly enough, we say it at night after Ma'ariv on Rosh Hashanah. We say it Leil Yom Kippur. And we also say it when we put the Sefer Torah back in the Aron on weekdays. L'Hashem ha'oretz umloa, the earth, everything in the earth belongs to God. Tevel, the habitation, v'yosh ve'va, and all that inhabit it, all that live there. In other words, God owns everything. He is the boss of everything. He controls everything. L'Hashem ha'oretz umloa tevel v'yosh ve'va. Fine. The next pasuk in Tehillim says, Kihu al yamim yisad, because God set up the foundation of earth on water. We know, as we just learned, the whole place is a glob of water. God said, let the water collect in one place and let the earth rise above. We know if you dig down into the earth, you're going to eventually get to water. And that, in fact, is one of the events that led up to the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, where David was digging for the Shitin, that special pipe. He was digging down to the center of the earth to connect the Mizbeach, the under part of the Mizbeach, to the Shitin. So the Ribono Shel Olam created earth on a foundation of water. So now let's read the pasuk. L'David Mizmor, L'Hashem ha'oretz umloa tevel v'yosh ve'va. The whole earth and all that inhabit it belong to God. Ki, because Hual Yamim Yisad, he put the whole earth and created a foundation of water. What does A have to do with B? Ki means because. Yeah. God is in control, is the sovereign. He owns everything. He controls everything in the world and all its inhabitants. You know why? Because he put land on water. How does B prove A? Okay, so obviously we're not talking about, we're not understanding the pasuk properly. Rav Hutner says, if the pasuk we're talking about, because God created the world and because he's a sovereign of the world. If we're talking about sovereign and control, we're not going to prove sovereignty and control because he put land on water. Doesn't sound like that's the pshat in the pasuk. So there's something else happening in this pasuk. So Rav Hutner in paragraph Tesvav says that people say man is a microcosm of the world. In fact, Rav Hutner says one can say the opposite. The world is a big analogy to man. What Rav Hutner wants to point out here is whatever's going on in the world has its source in man. Va'olam, on the third line, Va'olam eina ela spiegel. Spiegel is a mirror. The world is only a mirror, b'hakbala linyanav shel adam. The world is just a mirror image of man. Okay, let's see what that means. Paragraph Tes Zayin, the bottom of page Reish Nun Dalet, Rav Hutner quotes the Rambam that we learned, Elul, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's a Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva. Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva spends time explaining Bechira and how it's a yesod of the Torah. It's a fundamental principle of the whole Torah. We explained yesterday how Amalek wants to destroy that fundamental principle, not because it's a fundamental principle of the Torah, but because it's a fundamental principle of how the whole system operates. The whole tachlis of the Bria, God's tachlis in creating with the world is hatava, and hatava only occurs because man has free will. Amalek attacks the idea of free will, and therefore he's not just attacking an idea, he's attacking the central concept that makes the whole system work and the purpose for which God created that system. So in there, the Rambam, in the Hilchos Tshuva, the Rambam, in discussing Bechira, he raises the famous question, the contradiction that appears to man's brain, because we're limited by what a man can understand. There seems to be a contradiction between man's free will and God's omniscience. God knows everything. If God knows everything, the simple question becomes, a child is born. At the moment the child is born, or even before the child is born, does God know whether this child is going to be a tzaddik or a rasha? Let's even, you can even go a step further. Does God know whether this boy, using a boy as an example, does God know when this child is born, again, even before that, we're using born as a simple example, does God know when the child is born, that when this boy will grow up and he'll be 17 years old and 311 days into his 18th year, that morning he will intentionally not put on tefillin? Does God know that in advance, or does God find that out afterwards? God knows it all in advance. If God knows all this in advance, then that's the way it's going to be. When he's 17 years old, 311 days into his 18th year, he will intentionally not wear tefillin. Because if you're going to say that even though God knows he's not going to put on tefillin, but he may still do it, that means that God doesn't have a perfect knowledge of the future. So if God has a perfect knowledge of the future, and that knowledge is not subject to change, because if it can change, then God doesn't have a perfect knowledge of the future. So if God's knowledge of the future is perfect, then how do I have freedom of choice? Since when I was born, God already knew 17 years old, 311 days into it, the person is intentionally not going to put on his tefillin. So how does Bechira, it's called Bechira and Yediyah. How do you meld these two together? Man has free choice, and yet God has the ultimate knowledge of everything that will happen in the future, and he is not making any mistake, and nothing is going to change based upon his Yediyah. So at the bottom of page Reish Nun Dalet, paragraph Tes Zayin, Rav Hutner writes, Harambam mala et hadiyun b'stira shebein Yediyah u'Bechira. The Rambam raises the question of the contradiction between Yediyah, God knows, has a perfect knowledge of the future, Uvachira, and man has freedom of choice. V'kosei. And the Rambam answers the question there. The same way that it's impossible for a person to understand the Ribono Shel Olam's existence. We talk about this many times. We don't know anything about Mitziuso. We know nothing about God's actual existence. We develop this in the Das Tavunos in the Ramchal. We talked about the concept of Gilui HaYichud. There's nothing positive we can say about the Ribono Shalom. I want you to know how smart the Ribono Shalom is. He's a million times, his IQ is a billion. No matter what you're going to say, you're going to be wrong because you can't quantify his wisdom. You can't quantify his strength. God is a billion ballistic missiles. You cannot talk this way because you don't know what you're talking about. So in the positive sense, you cannot categorize what the Ribono Shalom is. The only thing we can do is to be Megali Yehudai, which means negation. Ein kamoicha velo kim Hashem. There's nobody like you. There's nobody like you in knowledge. There's nobody like you in strength. But how much? I can't talk about that. I can't talk in the affirmative. I can talk in the negative. Nobody's like him. Nobody has his wisdom. Nobody has his perfection. Nobody has his chesed. Nobody has his gevura that I can say. So no one understands the true existence of God, Mitziusa. So the Rambam says the same way we cannot comprehend his existence. To the same extent, it's impossible to understand what it means that God knows something. So when we think as human beings, we put into our thoughts human understanding. So in the human understanding, at that low level, we say, if I as a human have free choice, and I as a human have perfect knowledge of what's going to happen, then how is it possible that I have free choice? Those two things can't work together in a human brain because the human brain can't compute those two things working together. However, the same way we don't understand God's existence, we don't understand his intelligence, his intellect, his das. We have no concept of it. And therefore, while in our hard drive, Bechira and Yediyah cannot work together, that has nothing to do with the Ribono Shalom's wisdom, which is way beyond anything we can imagine. And in that kind of place, these two ideas can actually coexist. There are a lot of things you don't understand because you don't compute. There are people that are great at math and they can work on equations and they can deal with Einstein's theory of relativity and they can deal with equations that take up three chalkboards. And there are people that look at it and they get dizzy. And by the same token, there are people that understand music and they can read music notes and they can write music, and other people are not musically inclined. People have different kaiches, and we all know that there are things that our minds work better at and things that our minds don't work so good at. Some people have good memories, some people have not such good memories, but they're much more analytic, etc., etc. There are different ways that different people think in different capacities. We need to understand that the same way amongst people, there are different mental capacities. The Beraishis Shalom's lahavdol billion, trillion, zillion havdolas. The Ribono Shalom's mental capacity is something that we absolutely have no concept of. And in that kind of mental capacity, ideas that we can't fit together there. So the Rambam says, Hu Shanovi Omar, and this is what Yeshaya said, Ki lo machshavosai machshavosechem v'lo da'achechem du'achai. That's what the Navi means. I don't think like you, and that's it. So don't try to compare me to you. Man's existence in the world, the great chiddush in man, now you're beginning to see, we've learned 3 or 4 Pachad Yitzchaks in different places about Bechira. How central this idea was to Rav Hutner, developing this idea in so many different places. And we saw yesterday how critical this was to Rav Hutner and his thinking about Bechira and his prediction that before Mashiach comes, in the times of Mashiach, there'll be tremendous attacks on Koyach HaBechira. There'll be all kinds of people that will deny that man has freedom of choice. And we talked about that yesterday. While man the chiddush in man is that God put on planet Earth someone who has decision-making capacity based upon, is it right, is it wrong? We're not lions and tigers. Animals see a lion, sees a deer, hungry, eat, period. He doesn't make a cheshbon that deer is walking with 4 little baby deers and now they're going to be Yisayimim deers. The lion not making any cheshbons about Rachmanis. Should I eat the deer? Should I leave the deer to take care of the children? Right, wrong, ethics, morals. No cheshbonis there. The chiddush of man is he make these cheshbonis, but at the same time that man has bechira. When a person starts thinking about in his mind, God knows everything. He knows past, present, future, and he knows it perfectly, and a person starts thinking about this. In his brain, a person, as soon as he starts delving into the question of, not into the question, he starts delving into the principle that God has a perfect knowledge of the past, present, and future, which is not going to change. It's perfect. He right away has in his brain a contradictory concept of a freedom of choice. And God doesn't know what I'm going to do, but God does know what I'm going to do, but he can't know what I'm going to do, but he does know what I'm going to do. So as soon as a person starts thinking of Yediyah, God's complete, perfect knowledge, he already has percolating in his brain for the longest time that he has free will. Even though man cannot really grasp this understanding of how these two contradictory concepts can live in his brain at the same time. Sure, I understand. I have freedom of will, and God knows ahead of time what I'm going to do, and his knowledge is perfect. It's not going to change. And I keep these two ideas in my mind, but they are a contradiction. Nevertheless, in his brain, there's a place in his brain that says God knows everything perfectly. There's a part in his brain that says I have freedom of choice. And when the two collide, I don't have right now a perfect answer. This is the place that is similar to the oceans of the world. Remember, Rafutna said that man and the world is a mirror image of man. In man, there's a place in his mind that no matter how much he thinks, he can't function there. He thinks about God knowing everything and it's perfect, and he thinks about his freedom of will, and he can't live in that stira. He can't live in that contradiction. He can't figure it out. He knows that there's a contradiction. He knows this is a place where he can't live. He has to live his life as a life of bechira, even though he knows that there's yediyah. If chas v'sholom he goes into yediyah and says everything's predetermined, it's the end of Torah. So he knows he has to live in bechira. He knows that there's this concept of yediyah, but he can't live in that place. It's not inhabitable for him. The same way that there's a place in the human being's mind that he can't really live there, the Ribono Shel Olam made a place in the world that is analogous to this place in the brain, and that's called the oceans. It's a place where man can look. You look at the ocean, you say, it's beautiful. I can take a swim in it, and I can enjoy it, but eventually I've got to get out of there because I can't live in there. A person can sit for a little while and think about this contradiction of Yediyah and Bechira, but he can enjoy possibly the thoughts about how is it this and how is it this, and it may become very intellectually stimulating, but at the end of the thinking, he's got to get out because you can't live there. It's not possible to truly answer this question completely. And chas v'sholom, if you end up on the wrong side of the coin of Yediyah, you just destroyed the Torah. Perusha sheshom lo magia b'chira hu olam hayadiyah. The place it's not fit for human habitation, which is the ocean, is analogous to a place that has no bechira and only has God's ultimate knowledge. It's a place that man can't exist in. You can't exist waking up every day knowing that everything you're going to do that day has already been predetermined, so it doesn't make a difference what decisions you make. You can't live successfully, constructively in that world as a yid, that everything I'm going to do and not do is already predetermined. The mitzvahs I do, God already predetermined. Hashom, the Averis are predetermined. And at the end of the day, I have no responsibility for anything I did. You can't live there as a yid. The same way you can't live there as yid, there's an analogous place that Rebbeinu Shalom wants to show you. There's an analogous place in the world that he made that you can't live. So take it easy. The same way in the physical world, there's a place that's uninhabitable for you as a human being. There's a place in your mind that you need not go there. You can take a little swim in there, but you can't live there. Me'ata, paragraph Yud Zayin, misparish lefanenu hakasav Lashem ha'aretz umloa. Now we have a fuller understanding of that pasuk we started with. Lashem ha'aretz umloa. God controls everything, and he put water as the foundation of earth. What does B have to do with A? Perush. So you remember yesterday we quoted the Gemara. The Gemara in Brachas and in Megillah says, Hakol bidei shamayim chutz mi'yirah shamayim. God controls everything except Yishmiras Torah mitzvahs. That's where you have Bechira. So God controls everything, but there's a little place that God carved out and said, you human, here you have Bechira, as if God's saying, I relinquish my sovereignty and I'm making you a sovereign in your area of Bechira. Pirish. So Rafutna says, Ki hakol bidei shamayim chutz mi'yirah shamayim. Chazal tell us, hakol bidei shamayim chutz mi'yirah shamayim. V'yanira shakadosh baruch hu, and it would appear that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Rafutna said this in Yiddish, so they put the Yiddish words in, hat aroiskelos epis von sein Hand, hishmit mashem yada. It sounds like the Chazal are telling us God controls everything except. So it sounds like God released and relinquished some control and gave it to man. Mitachas balu, so God gave up some of his control. Nevertheless, because he gave Torah mitzvahs b'chiva to me. Nevertheless, nevertheless, this is what that kapitel Tehillim, these two psukim are telling us. Lashem ha'oretz umloa, God owns, controls everything. He knows everything that's going to happen perfectly. Ki af ma shehishmit miyada, even what you think he relinquished into your hand through Bechira, v'nosan lezulas, be'emes adayim biyadayu. You should know that actually God is in full control at all times anyways. Everything and all its inhabitants belong to the Rebbeinu Shalom. And that first pasuk is telling us that there's something called Yediyah. God knows everything in advance. He knows it perfectly, and therefore he controls the world. He's the sovereign of the world, the whole world, and all its inhabitants. According to this concept, even the Bechira you have is controlled by God. Well, then how do I really have Bechira? How do I work this out? I actually have freedom, but God controls my freedom. How do I prove this point? Ki hu al yamim yisada, because he put the earth, he exposed the earth upon which you live on water in which you can't live. Ha'oretz yishuv ha'adam, earth which man inhabits. Nivna gabe yam naharas, the foundation of where man lives, the earth, is on water. Yishuv oilam, it's a place where man can't live. So man lives in a place, earth, the foundation under the earth is a place he can't live. He can't live in the foundation of the water. So too a man lives in a place called Bechira. Underneath there's a foundation called Yediyah. And you can try to work out this in your mind, whatever you'd like to think about it, but you need to understand that you can't stay there very long because it's uninhabitable. You cannot at the end work out Yediyah and Bechira Kihu Al Yamim Yesada, the perfect flow, the pasuk flows perfectly. Lashem ha'oretzim loa table v'yoshrei. God controls everything. Even your Bechira isn't with God's control. But then how do I have Bechira if God is ultimately in control? Kihu al yamim yesada. Take a look at the planet. There's earth that you can inhabit, and there's water that's the foundation of the earth where you can't inhabit it. And the same thing is true. You can think about Yediyah and Bechira. You can swim in it a little, but it's not a place you can actually live. Olam HaBechira, the world in which we live, the world of free choice. Yisodos of him Olam Shel Yediyah. Nevertheless, the foundation underneath that world of Bechira is the world where God is truly the sovereign over everything. Sheva Emes Hakol Nisha B'dei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything remains in the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yudches V'Aleinu Ladas. Rafutna says Sha'avoda Hayachida B'Mikdash Hanasis B'Mayim Hayis Simchas Beis HaShapeva. The only avoda in the Beis HaMikdash during the whole year with water, Kohen washed his feet at the Kiyar. Yeah, but we're talking about an avoda on the Mizbeach. There's no avoda the whole year. Water had no place on the Mizbeach. There's only one time of the year. Water went to the Mizbeach, pure water. That's at the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. Kol avodas kulam nasu eidei chai o tzameach. All the avoda is either through a chai, an animal, a tzameach, something grew, right? You take flour, you make it into a flour offering. Umiyutam af bedomim, and some of them also were used for the domim, stone, make a mizbeach. Avol b'mayim lo matzinu. We find no avoda with water except the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. Rakan shovim min hamayim v'derech hamizbeach machzirin oisav shuvla tohamos. Yutes v'heimim advorim. Rafutna is, we didn't read that part of the Rafutna. Rafutna is basically working through a concept. Starts with a Maral. The way our Yomim Tovim work, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, is the way a person would be working for an employer, so to speak. The way a servant would be serving his master. Pesach, the Rebbeinu Shalom took us out of slavery, and we became his servants. On Shavuos, the Rebbeinu Shalom gave us the rule book, the Torah, of what's expected from us as his servants. And then we go and finish the job. We read the book, we do the job. And on Sukkot, we come back to the Rebbeinu Shalom and say, job complete, asisi shluchosi. I did what you asked me to do. And then the Rebbeinu Shalom says, you finished what I told you to do, come gather in my house, we're going to build a sukkah, you finished your job. This that's in terms of the year, and this is true, the Maral and Rafutna explains is true for the whole history of the world. Pesach began the process where we became servants of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Shavuos began the process where we're being taught what the job is to do in the world. And ultimately, as we learned in the Das Tunis, the job in the world is to be Magala Yichud HaBoirei. And for us to be Megala Yichud HaBoirei means we have to use the tools of Torah and mitzvahs to do that Gili HaYichud. Eventually what happens is we finish the job of Gili HaYichud, and a tremendous simcha comes to the world when the world comes to its state of perfection, and that's Sukkot, and that's why Sukkot is Man Simchaseinu. We come back to Rebbeinu Shalom and we said, we finished the work. And there's a special simcha. Well, when we finish our work, what happens? The Gemara in Sukkah tells us, the Sukkah Daf Nun Beis, the Gemara tells us that Rebbeinu Shalom is going to shech, He's going to annihilate the Yetzer Hara. No more Yetzer Hara, no more Bechira. We're finished with that phase of the world. We go into the pension phase where we collect our pension for all the work we did while we had a Yetzer Hara, which means that at the end of time, we get rid of the Yetzer Hara. The end of time, we get rid of Bechira. What Yontif represents the end of time, Pesach represents the beginning of history. We've become God's servants. Shavuos becomes the rule book. How do you do the job? Sukkot is we've done the job, we've completed the task, and now everybody's happy and rejoicing because we finished the job. Sukkot is the time of the Achros Hayomim, and there are many proofs to this. The Yontif of Sukkot is symbolic of Achros Hayomim, the end of days, Mashiach, and getting rid of Bechira. So now our footnote says beautifully, there's no time in the year where we bring water to the Mizbeach except Sukkot. What does water conjure up in your mind? Water is the foundation upon which the world exists. The foundation of the world is water, which means you are not in a place you can understand. The water represents God's Yediyah. The earth is the place where man lives with his Bechira. The water, which is the foundation of the world, that we can't grasp because that's a place where there is no Bechira, it's God's perfect knowledge. Well, guess what? Sukkot, which is symbolic of the end of days where there's no Yetzer Hara, and that's why the whole sugya of Yetzer Hara is a Masechta Sukkah. There's a whole, many Mefarshim talk about how did the sugya of Yetzer Hara end up in Masechta Sukkah? Why didn't it end up in Masechta Eruvin? The whole sugya of Yetzer Hara ended up in Sukkah because Sukkah is the end of the Yetzer Hara. So with the holiday of Sukkot, we complete our task. We have a tremendous simcha. It's the end of the Yetzer Hara. End of the Yetzer Hara means it's a yontif that represents end of Bechira. How do I symbolize end of Bechira? And there's no longer a contradiction between Bechira and Yediyah because there is no Bechira anymore. I symbolize that through water. And I bring the water to the Mizbeach, and that's the Simchas Beis Hashel Eva. So that will complete for now our discussion about Bechira on day 2 and day 3. Next week we'll take a look at day 3 more in depth. Okay, Rabbi Yitzchak, you're certainly on the right track. You're certainly on the right track with the Mayim at the Paradis. Okay, everybody have a wonderful day. Be happy, be safe. All you need Yeshua, Shav Yeshua. All you need Refuah, Shav Refuah. All you need Nechamas, Shav Nechamas. All you that need Brachas, Yeshuas, Nechamas, Refuahs. The Baruch Shalom, send it to them. Shnei Besuas Taivas. Mamish B'Rtzayin Hashem today. Brachas, Yeshuas, Refuahs, Nechamas can only come from the Baruch Shalom, the Echad, Yochid, Umiyuchad. We recognize that, we internalize that, we live that, we do a Gili HaYichud in our own lives. We donate that Gili HaYichud to the Gili HaYichud of Klal Yisrael, so we bring the Gili HaYichud to its critical mass. The Baruch Shalom, please, B'Rtzayin Hashem, send Mashiach Tzidkenu today. You can build the Beis HaMikdash, bring the Machzas HaShekel, bring Korbanos. And the day will be a day of tremendous Simcha Atzuma for Klal Yisrael, for the whole world. For Shalema, Moshe Zelig ben Rezel, Yosef Chaim ben Shoshana Menucha, all the Choli HaKaroina, Sof Shachal Yisrael, Force Never Shuvas Aguf, Hashta Bavalos, Man Karib, Lema, Amen. Everybody, please take care of yourself. Go where you need to go. Refrain from going where you don't need to go. Where you need to go, make a cheshbon. When should you go? When should you not go? When it's busy? When it's not busy? These cheshbonis on mitzvahs, last 2 Beis Yosefs and Choshen Mishpat, last Ber HaGoyim, Choshen Mishpat, and avoid Hashem. It's a mitzvah to make these cheshbonis to keep yourself healthy. A healthy body means the ability to be shoyim et Torah mitzvahs. A healthy body means the ability to be makabel pnei Mashiach Tzidkenu. B'Tzayin Hashem Mamish today, b'Simcha. dancing, singing. We should be zeicha today